Hey, y'all.
All right, are you guys ready? If our pastor will take his seats, then so, just to give you a little background on what we're doing, we had this fun idea. Our little book club that's been meeting has read some different books on social justice, and this last book we read was The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and we just finished that up. And then we got to thinking, talking with some of the Shalom objectives and how we could put together an event. And then we have this lovely in our congregation who works at the Rosa Parks Museum. And she mentioned how that Miss V.L Cox had this wonderful art exhibit and that maybe we could do something. So we came up with this kind of fun hybrid event where we're going to Zoom. I see people looking up and I'm like, are we? We're going to Zoom and talk to the artist, V.L Cox. We're going to see some of her art. Madeline's going to kind of steer the ship on this. Now, I get to do something fun and official. Okay. Madeleine Burkhart, here you go, is the Adult Education Coordinator and Curator at the Rosa Parks Museum. And over 5 years, she has implemented programs and hosted exhibitions that directly address relevant social justice issues and the current civil rights the current civil rights movement. In 2019, she wrote an article in V23. Is that the title? Volume 23. Sorry, of the University of Leicester's Museological Review, and was recently listed as one of Bloop.
Top 50 museum.
Well, I'm just looking at the Bloop part. Okay, thank you. Travel and Leisure's top 50 museum influencers in the world, and has been featured on 3 30 under 30 lists in the past 3 years. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Art History with a minor in Italian Studies at Auburn and her Master of Arts in Museum Studies from Johns Hopkins University. She is a daughter of the congregation belonging specifically to Robert and Carla back there. So, Madeline, I'm going to have you take it away and introduce our artist and say what you want to say. Do what you want to do. Be who you are. There you go.
Okay, I can tell there's an echo. Just like, I'm going to cover this early on, and there's going to be a Q&A portion. I am pretty much deaf in my left ear, so if you could just speak up and use the mics, then that would be really helpful for me, because I have realized I could not hear Tracy or Shelby at all earlier. So thank you guys for coming. Hi, V.L. All right, cool. Sound's not working, but that's all right. We'll figure it out. So V.L. and I have been joking for a few years that we were going to take this show kind of on the road, and I guess we're making that happen now. I've known her since 2018, I think, when she did the End Hate exhibition at the Rosa Parks Museum, and Congressman John Lewis liked it, so we decided to bring her back again for Watchfires and her new body of work. So we're the first museum that has shown some of the pieces that we'll be talking about today, so that's really interesting. If you're a fan of art in any way, you know there are kind of two categories. There's the art for art's sake, which James McNeill Whistler, a 19th century painter, big fan of that. And then there's the kind I'm a fan of, which is the kind that V.L Cox does, which is very poignant, in-your-face art that is kind of sort of propaganda. All right. Let's see. Go. No? Okay.
Only the point of part works. Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to put this quote by W.E.B. Du Bois on here because I think it's very relevant, especially to the kind of work that V.L. does, and it just says, "Thus all art is propaganda and ever must be. Despite the wailing of the purists, I do not care not saying that word, I'm in a sanctuary, for any art that is not used for propaganda, but I do care when propaganda is confined to one side while the other is stripped and silent." And V.L. Cox is very much so not silent. So the first piece that we're going to talk about is the title piece, and that is Watchfires. All right, have at it. If you can. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
If you want to go on, talk about Watchfires.
I don't think she can hear us. You have to hold a sign that says, "Go ahead and start," because she can't hear you.
I didn't think she heard me.
I
Can you hear me? Oh, that's on now. If you want to go ahead and start with Watchfires, that would be great. We've got it pulled up on our screen here.
Awesome. Yeah, I did Watchfires, and I thought about, actually I named the whole exhibition after that because of what's been going on in our world today. Moving up here from the south to the Hudson River Valley area, I really did not realize that the Watchfires originated in the Hudson River Valley area, George Washington and all that. I didn't know that when I chose this. I've been reading about what the word meant and things like that, but basically it stands for a fire maintained during the night as a signal for the use of someone who is on watch. And I feel like we have lost our way. We really have gotten, divided. It's a very divisive nation these days, and it seems like we have just lost touch with each other and with humanity within itself. So I really wanted this whole exhibition, and especially this piece, to kind of be a reminder that, those fires need to burn again to where we can find our way home. We need to find each other again. We need to stick together. We need to stay in touch with each other. And if we don't, it's really going to spiral out of control. It's pretty bad right now. But I found this piece very moving. And, that's what that stands for. That's what that piece stands for and represents.
Do y'all have any questions just straight off the bat for V.L? I know this is like just the entrance piece to her work. So Watchfires is, again, the title of this exhibition, and I purposely didn't like fully tell her story. Oh, is it not working? Did I get it now?
Can I ask a question about the
Oh,
art,
yeah.
the piece? Is it an orange light?
It is. The light, I use LED lighting quite a bit in my work. I want that to represent the fire, the light, that hopefully will pull people together again. The last sentence in my description, it says, "Now more than ever, we need the watchfires to burn again through the night, to light up the darkness as a beacon of hope, strength, freedom, equality, and civility, to illuminate the path that once was traveled so people can find their way home again."
Nice.
Yes.
Could we maybe have her tell a little bit about her background?
Sure. So I was about to say, there's a reason I didn't like purposefully say her background, because the next piece that we're talking about is pretty much her background. But does anyone else have one specifically on this piece? Yes.
How big is that? What size is it?
What size is your is Watchfires? Do you?
Yeah, it's 24 inches by 24 inches by 21 inches, a little over 2 feet, almost 2 feet square.
Yes.
Also, is this on permanent display somewhere?
Is it on? I'm sorry.
Permanent display?
On display?
On display, permanent display?
Oh, permanently. If you want to buy it.
Oh.
I guess. Yes, if it was on permanent display anywhere.
I give churches a discount.
I'm trying to sell your stuff too. But it hasn't, I don't believe it has a buyer yet, but I don't know where it's going after us either.
It's going to go to Cincinnati if it's not purchased before then for an exhibition in November.
Is the wood that was used, is there something special about the wood, or was it just
Okay.
wood that you?
Is there anything special about the wood that you chose to use?
You know, I thought long and hard about the wood. Now that I'm up here, I've been up here less than a year here in New York. It's a little more difficult to find materials like I can find back in the South. I have a lot of connections in the South as far as antiques, wood, everything like that. This was kind of one of those situations where I was wandering around Home Depot, and I noticed that the little pieces of wood that they pull the lumber in on, the little slats that it rests on, they were just making a big stack of them and throwing them away. And I just found them the perfect size, something that other people had just kind of casually disregarded, which I feel is happening in our society today to begin with. I thought that wood was perfect. And so they let me have it. And that is what I used for that piece.
Oh, I did not know that. All right, if we can move on to reflection, please. All right, and if you could give us a little bit more of your background too, which I know you have with the story, but.
Yeah, I come from South Arkansas. I was born in Louisiana, and my father was in the Air Force down around Barksdale Air Force Base. And they moved to Arkansas where their families were, and that's where I was raised. I grew up in South Arkansas. And so my grandmother ended up raising me. My mother had a substance abuse, problem, so when my parents split up at 12, she ended up raising me. And probably I was fairly sheltered from her. She was a second grade school teacher. Sheltered from the things going on in the world. I don't think I realized what was really going on back then. But yet, the things that I observed, for an example, when I was in high school, some of the white boys there started a BTA movement, which is a Back to Africa movement. And they were sticking stickers up and posters all around the walls and everything. It was very racist. And then one of the guys that was behind that actually burned a cross in one girl's yard because she was dating a black boy. And the gasoline splashed back on his leg. And to this day, he has a scar on his leg where that happened. He walked with a limp for a little while. But, in high school, you really I knew it was wrong. And I never went along with it. But I never quite grasped how horrendous that was until I got older and started basically fighting for civil rights. This is a piece, I bought this old Civil War wardrobe from a collector down in Little Rock, Arkansas, because I liked it and I knew her very well. And it came from Tennessee. And so I had that in the back of my studio one day. I was working on my computer, it was behind me. And I use a lot of materials in my work. So I had a pride flag, an American flag, and a Confederate flag that I had hung inside it that I could, that I was planning on using for future projects. Well, my cat jumped on top of it and I heard the door creak behind me. And when I turned around, the Confederate flag was peeking out from the door and my face was in the mirror as I was looking at it. And I changed the photograph out to a photograph that I took in the back of a sanctuary during COVID because I actually like the photograph better. But it basically represents, even though you know what's right and wrong, especially as we get older, the way that you were brought up, you constantly have to fight this. You fight the racism, you fight the homophobia, you do fight the discrimination, the sexism, you fight that your whole life, especially coming from the South where it still seems to be rampant in a lot of areas. And so I wanted this painting to basically represent that. It seems to always be in your background, even though you were trying very hard to do the right thing. And so that's what this piece, represents. And I'm going to read a little bit from these narratives, as I go along here. On this piece, I was taught that the Civil War, I was taught this in high school, it was fought over states' rights, the Northern aggression and the taxation of goods. They never mentioned slavery hardly at all back then when I grew up. So, that's what this piece represents. So the battle, no matter how old I live or whatever, I will always kind of have that battle with me in the background. A lot of my family still acts this way. And so that's what that piece basically stands for and represents. It's a very personal piece.
All right, do y'all have any questions on reflection or any more on her background? Sure.
I just misunderstood what she said about the reflection in the mirror. Did you say that was a photograph?
Sure. Could you explain where the reflection in the mirror came from? Is that from a photograph that you used?
Yes, this is a mixed media piece is what it is. And that is a photograph that I took behind a sanctuary. My studio during COVID, when I came back to Arkansas from Virginia, I stayed at St. Joseph's. It's an old Catholic orphanage that is no longer in use. And my studio was out there for a long time. A friend of mine has a lease on it. The diocese owns the building, but she has a lease on it and they do art studios and an urban farm to where, they help feed the community and things like that. So I stayed out there at night and made sure that the building was secure. There is a sanctuary that's not being used anymore. And I would go there, especially during the beginning of COVID when everything was so scary and the isolation started setting in. I would go there and sit in that sanctuary a lot. The stained glass was beautiful and I found peace there. So there was a place where the priest would change clothes behind the sanctuary and there was a mirror on the wall. And I turned around one day, kind of exploring back there and caught my reflection. And that is the photograph that I used for it. I would like to also say with that piece, as I'm looking through my narratives, there was one time my stepfather in South Arkansas, he suspected that I might be gay. So he took me in the backyard and said, I want to talk to you, at the porch swing. And, we sit in the back porch swing, you're in trouble. And so I sat there and talked to him a little bit, didn't hardly say anything. And he goes, well, and he took a big old chaw of tobacco and he spit it on the ground. And he goes, at least you're not dating any N-word. And then he got up and walked back into the house. And I thought long and hard about that when I painted this painting. And that's what I mean by always having things like that in your background. I'm sure we all, coming from the South, can relate to some story along those lines. And so I wanted to kind of be sure and throw that in there as well. This is part of the inspiration of that painting.
All right, any others about reflection? Yes, sir.
Does she think that she would have gotten the same impact from that had it not been the rebel flag, had it been the United States flag instead getting exposed as the door opened, is the way
Okay,
I'm picturing it?
Would you maybe have gotten the same impact if the doors had opened and it had been a U.S. flag or another flag that popped out? Maybe if the door had been even more open than it was?
Well, it might have changed it a little bit more if I'd have caught, an image of maybe two of the flags together, maybe even all three, to be honest with you. I don't think that it would have the same meaning as this one. This has been a big struggle throughout my life, not my personal beliefs, but my relationship to my family. There's several members of my family that I'm very strained with because of this behavior, this racist behavior. And so I don't think it would have had the same meaning. I think it would have had a different meaning, probably just as impactful, to be honest with you, but it would have been it would have come from a different place, I guess, inspiration-wise.
Thank you.
Any others on reflection or on her background? I know she's been making art for over 30 years now. Do you know that for sure? And she's shown everywhere. And I want to say the next piece we have is one of the ones that was actually shown on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Yes, I'm right. All right, so the intake doors are the doors that made the most impact with Congressman John Lewis and other congressmen and women who came through the museum in 2018. They're also, as you can see, they were shown on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial outside the Arkansas State Capitol, and they're just fantastic. So if you want to talk about your intake doors.
Yeah, those doors were created in response to HB 1228. In 2015, the Arkansas legislature tried to pass a bill that basically would have denied life-saving medical care and even a sandwich in a restaurant to gay people, LGBTQ. It was in response to gay marriage, and they really were aggressive about it. It was absolutely terrifying to me. I, at the time, was in a 20-year relationship with a partner raising 2 kids, 2 children, and paying a mortgage and had a car payment, working very hard and minding my own business. And when I thought that me and my family could be denied, an ambulance service or treatment in a hospital, it absolutely horrified me. I'd had an idea. I'd seen on television where a homeless man had been killed by some teenagers. It was a news story at one point, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just did that just to do it. So I kind of sketched out an idea at the time of something along these lines with the doors previous to that. And then when the tornado blew through Arkadelphia in '97, there was a door down there in one of the buildings, in the back, of course, that had been taken off, that said colored only on it. And so I thought about that as well. So I got the idea to do this installation basically to kind of bounce off of the segregation era doors, to show that you can't separate people like that. We've been down that road before, and we don't need to go down that road again. I got a permit, and I went down and I set them up on the state capitol steps in protest. I've never done anything like that before. And so people started coming down there. They started locking their doors and coming down to the state capitol to see them. I woke up the next morning and they were on Yahoo News, and they were in 2 or 3 different languages, India and South Korea, and I was just shocked, to be honest with you. But what happened with those doors is that I realized the true power of the arts. People really paid attention to that. It seems like when you could cut through all the blather and all the political division, when you have a visual in front of you, it really had an impact on people. So I took them to the Lincoln Memorial after that. I got a permit with the Park Service up there, and it was on Earth Day. There were supposedly around 250,000 people there that day. And I was talking to everyone. Paula Morrell with Tales from the South, she had an NPR show at the time, went with me. And she was talking to people, and she walked up to me and said, "There's someone I want you to meet." And so I turned around, and there was the biggest guy I've ever seen in my life, and I could tell he was a skinhead. And he had not gang tattoos, but white supremacist tattoos on his neck and on his hands, and his wife was with him. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get killed. So he stuck his hand out, and in a quiet voice, he said, "I want to thank you for what you're doing." He goes, "I was born in the Klan in South Georgia." He goes, "My father and brother are still in the Klan in South Georgia." And he said, "My wife and I left South Georgia under the cover of darkness to come here to Washington, D.C. because they were going to kill my child who is transgender." He goes, "They were going to murder their own flesh and blood." And he goes, "I've since tried to get my tattoos removed and become a man of peace." And I will never forget that guy. it really moved me. And I tell that story often. I'll just never forget that guy and the way we connected through those doors, through the visual arts. And if that man can change his heart after being indoctrinated for a whole lifetime of hatred, anybody can. And so the Doors have been a very powerful series. They've traveled in a lot of different places. They've opened up here at the LGBT Center in New York. They've been at the Virginia Holocaust Museum, Longwood Center for the Visual Arts, where the vice presidential debates were held. They toured them. That's on the Civil Rights Trail. They toured them. And we had an enormous response when they were showing at the Rosa Parks Museum the first time. So that's kind of the story of the Doors.
Do you mind reading, let me see if it's connected to the audio. Do you mind reading off what each door says from left to right? It's a little hard to see in here.
Yeah, let me, hang on just a second, make sure I get them in order here. I think I've got them memorized, but let me just make sure here.
I might have them memorized, but I'm a little scared to do it.
Hang on just a second. They're here in my hallway right now, but they're stacked, so just a second. Yeah, the original door started out with whites only, colored only, LGBT only, immigrant only, homeless only, and then the human being doors is wrapped in chains, because when you separate people and try to keep them divided, you're denying them human being status. So those were the original ones that sat on the steps of the state capitol. I had a veterans advocate come up to me at the Capitol, and he says, "You're not going to believe how bad our soldiers are treated when they come back, especially after 2 or 3 tours of duty, if not more." He goes, "It's absolutely horrible. Would you consider adding a veterans door?" And I said, "Well, I really wasn't planning on it, but I'm very moved with what you're telling me, and I'm a big supporter of our military," so I did. And when I took those to the Lincoln Memorial the first time, the veterans door was in at that time, and the honor flight was there. So the World War II veterans and Korean veterans were there that day. And that was absolutely, and that's the day I met the ex-white supremacists. And that was absolutely amazing. There was one lady in her 90s, she had been a Navy nurse, and she wanted her photograph taken in front of the doors. And then there was a gentleman that walked up, and he stood in front of the LGBT door, and I thought, oh my gosh, I would have never guessed he was gay. Well, he wasn't. He said, "This is for my granddaughter, Emma," and I fought for her rights too. And it almost made me cry. It was a very powerful moment, and I had an enormous amount of support from the greatest generation that day. It was very powerful. So after the Women's March, I was in on that Women's March in Little Rock, Arkansas. I think we had around 7,000 people show up for that. I was surprised at the turnout for that and was very motivated. So I added a women's only door as well and went back for a 2-year anniversary later through the National Park Service and showed it then. And the response was the same. I didn't know with the changing political climate what the second anniversary was going to be like. I was a little nervous, to be honest with you, but it went exceptionally well. I don't believe I had one negative comment the first or the second time on the doors at all. So the doors have been very, very powerful and a very special body of work.
Okay. Do y'all have any questions on her doors? No, they're pretty self-explanatory. Sorry? Go on back through them again? Okay, so it's whites only. What's the next one? Did you want to go through them just so I don't mess it up again?
Whites only, LGBT only.
White door is coloreds only, and then the green door is LGBT only. The red door is immigrant only, and the gray door is homeless only. The blue door, and I may have these out of order because I'm just looking at that first photograph, is veterans only, and then the pink door is women only. The brown door is the human beings door, and the letters of human beings is gold leaf. It is prayer gold leaf. A friend of mine went overseas. I can't remember the name of the country. It starts with an M, but they hammer the gold in very, very, very fine sheets. And he gave me some in exchange for some tickets to see the Dalai Lama in Fayetteville, Arkansas, because I had a client meeting and couldn't go. And so the human beings, I believe, it's such a precious, I mean, we're all precious. And so as humans, every human is precious. And so I did the letters in gold leaf on that door. That's the brown door with the chains on it.
Did you get it that time? Okay. Do y'all have any other questions about the doors? All right, if you could go to the next one, please. Next one is Colombia, which is on display at the museum. I should say the intake doors are not with us right now, but they showed with us in 2018.
Yeah, Colombia is a piece I did. I traveled back and forth to New York quite a bit after coming up here. I fell in love with New York. Now, I don't think I could live in the middle of Manhattan because I'm a country girl. But I love New York because anything and everything you could ever think of wanting to try or see is here. It really is an amazing melting pot of people and cultures, and I really like that. So I did Colombia based on that, and I'm going to read a little bit about that from the narrative. Diversity is everywhere, but the first place I really noticed the richness and the delicious melting pot of culture was New York City. You can't get in the elevator without hearing 3 different languages. And the food is just as diverse as the people. It's one of the reasons I love New York so much. I feel surrounded by the real world around me, and I feel free. Walt Whitman, who is one of my favorite poets, sums it up pretty well. I am with you, you men and women of a generation, or ever so many generations hence. Just as you feel when you look on the river and sky, so I felt. Just as any of you is one of a living crowd, I was one of a crowd. Just as you are refreshed by the gladness of the river and the bright flow, I was refreshed. Just as you stand and lean on the rail, yet hurry with the swift current, I stood and I was hurried. Just as you look on the numberless mast of ships and the thick-stemmed pipes of steamboats, I looked. In his poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, Whitman extends this grand vision of democracy and brotherly love to all diverse people of New York. He speaks of solidarity and shared human experience across distances and generations. He speaks directly to the reader, and that is from Jesse Latour, A Brief History of American Literature. And so that is what that piece represents.
Do y'all have any? Okay, I think I got it. Do y'all have any questions about Colombia? Yes.
Is that an American flag wrapped in a netting? What's the medium?
I believe it's an American flag under a dress form. Is that correct?
Yes. It represents Colombia, basically.
And so the bottom of the flag can fall down, and so she's on our walls with a skirt. Pretty much, if that makes sense.
I'm sorry, what's the stuff, what's on top of it?
The stuff on top of it is just a dress form from like way back in the day. So it's like it's hard to describe.
The vintage dress form. It's supposed to represent Lady Columbia.
Is the netting wire, or what is the material that the netting of the dress form is made from?
What is the material that the wire is on the dress form? Is it wire?
Yes.
Is it wire?
It's metal. Dress form is metal, yes.
Sorry, we'll get there eventually with my hearing loss. All right, any other questions on Colombia? Yes.
Why do you choose to represent Colombia in this way?
Okay, could you repeat that?
Why do you choose to represent Colombia in this way? Like, why did you think of a American flag over as a dress with a dress form over it?
Okay, so why did you think that an American flag in a dress form should represent Colombia?
Well, it seemed, hang on, so I'm going to pull an image up here on my phone. It seemed like I've seen an image of Colombia, and it was this beautiful woman in a flowing dress. So when Whitman is talking about democracy, I thought that that was kind of representational of that. The flag, of course.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Any other questions on Colombia? We're still here. All right, if we could go to the next.
Hey, sorry, hang on just a second. I'll pull this up right here. The vintage photographs of Colombia, a lot of them had her in an American flag dress. Can y'all see that?
Yeah. Yeah, we can see it. Thank you. All right. So this chair we currently don't have at the museum right now, but it is one of her newest works, and I thought it would be very appropriate to talk about since the book club, like Tracy was mentioning, just finished a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And this piece is called Moore versus Dempsey. So if you could tell us a little bit more about that trial and what inspired you to make this chair.
Yes, one of the places where the exhibition, when it was touring, it ended up was at the Delta Cultural Center in Elaine, Arkansas, to be there during the 100-year anniversary of the Elaine Massacre and the unveiling of the memorial down there. Well, it was hang on a second, right here. Yeah, the Moore versus Dempsey trial is back during the Elaine Massacre. The men that were held in prison, basically put on trial for that. Well, they said that basically started the shooting and all that, where the race riot started. Anyway, they were the ones that were on trial in 1923, and Scipio Jones is the one who was a very smart lawyer, but he was a black man, so he had to work with the white lawyers to try to help get these men off to get their freedom. And I'm pretty much they were unjustly accused for one thing. So they asked me, the Delta Cultural Center asked me to do a project. They commissioned me to do a piece to represent that moment for the centennial. And so I did some research, and I used a 1920s chair that was identical to the chairs used in the courtroom during that time. And so the hands bending the bars represented the men who gained their freedom, and there are 6 bars for 6 men. The hands resting on the arms are exact replicas of Abraham Lincoln's hands at the Lincoln Memorial. I used some of my own photographs from this when I had my exhibition at the National Mall. And it's a powerful representation of the 14th Amendment, where even though Lincoln had been assassinated, the push for equal and civil rights stemming from the 13th Amendment for African Americans and slaves who had been emancipated after the Civil War continued on. It is a really beautiful chair. I'm very proud of that chair, and it's in the possession of the Delta Cultural Center. If you're ever in Helena, Arkansas, you should go by and check that place out. It's an amazing place.
Right. Do y'all have any questions about Moore versus Dempsey, the chair? I really like this one. By the way, I haven't seen it in person, but I really like this one a lot. Any? Yes.
How did she do that? Like, is it like a metal casting that's over? Is that just straight carved? Like,
How'd you do? Did you carve the hands, or use a actual form, freehand it?
They are actually part wood, and what I use is epoxy putty. Jewelers use it to make their ring molds. It's very expensive, but when it dries, after you mix the 2 pieces together, it is so hard, sometimes you cannot drive a nail through it. You have to use a Dremel tool to carve on it. So between the wood and the putty, that's how I sculpted the hands, but I used photographs of Lincoln's hands as a model.
Pretty intense.
The handshake mounted in front of the chair represents the agreement or the compromise the men ceded to obtain their release. So that's what that means.
If y'all ever happen to be down in Montgomery for any reason and go to the Equal Justice Initiative's National Memorial for Peace and Justice, there's a whole pillar that has the Elaine Massacre on it because it was such a tragic event. Any other questions on Moore versus Dempsey? Yes.
Call that the Delta Museum?
Sorry, what?
Where that chair is in Helena, is it the Delta?
Where is it? Oh, could you repeat where it is in Helena?
Yes, it is at the Delta Cultural Center. It is on Cherry Street, which is their main street in Helena, Arkansas.
Okay. All right, if we go to the next one. All right, now we're moving into the Watchfires ones that we have at the museum. This may be one of my favorite pieces she's ever done, and it is the Sugar Shack. And I went ahead and put a photo of the real Sugar Shack that she got inspiration from on this slide so y'all could just see really how well done it is.
Is it up, Madeline?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that is one of my favorite pieces as well. I love that piece, and it is one of my newest pieces. And I'm going to read from the narrative here so I don't forget anything, but I was on the train going into Manhattan one day to see some exhibitions that I wanted to see, and I was reading a book called Carry It On, The War on Poverty and the Civil Rights Movement in Alabama, 1964 through 1972, and the book is by Susan Youngblood Ashmore. It is an incredible book. I highly recommend you guys check it out if you get a chance. So I'm leafing through it. On page 196, I noticed a particular photograph, and I just couldn't quit staring at it. It was located in Lower Peachtree in Wilcox County, Alabama, and it was probably one of the most powerful photographs I've ever seen. So I started trying to find out more about it, and it is an original United Press International Press photo, which stated, Negro residents of Wilcox County in the heart of the Alabama's Black Belt line up at a rural store called the Sugar Shack. Rural Wilcox had not had a single registered Negro voter prior to the passage of a federal voting rights law last summer. Now Negro voters outnumber whites 2-1. And it really was powerful seeing these individuals dress up in their Sunday best. And I know it was hot. I'm from the South. I can't imagine how hot it was. That building did not have any air conditioner. And they stood in line and to vote, dressed up in their Sunday best. Where I come from in Arkansas, we have one of the lowest voter turnouts in the country. And it really, really drives home how proud these people were to have the right to vote and how important that is. And they didn't take it for granted. And so that photograph, I could not get it out of my head. And we'll check my thing and make sure I'm not going to forget anything. Oh, I also contacted the Wilcox County Historical Society in Alabama to see if the building, the original Sugar Shack, happened to still be standing, or if there was any kind of historical marker of any kind. And unfortunately, I was told no. It is one of the most powerful photographs that I've ever seen. And I hope at some point that they will put a marker up of some kind to represent that beginning vote. So I was driven to create a replica of that building. And it was one of the coolest projects, I think, one of them that I've ever done. I really, really enjoyed it. And I went by the old photograph and tried very hard to try to get the dimensions fairly correct from the photograph. But hopefully people will take the right to vote a little more seriously if they see this piece and kind of know the history behind it. And Madeline and them, you do have the photograph, I believe, along with this, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So, but that's what that piece is. And it's the book was amazing. I hope you guys will check that book out.
Do y'all have any questions about Sugar Shack? Yes.
What are the dimensions?
Sorry?
What are the dimensions of?
Of what is it made of?
No, what are the dimensions?
Oh, dimensions, I'm sorry. Hey, my hearing's not working today. Dimensions.
The dimensions are 30 inches by 24 inches by 23 inches.
We have it on a big pedestal in the middle of the room where it is at the museum. Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Where in Alabama was that this took place?
Wilcox County, so now down near Camden and the Black. Yes.
What was the name of that book again from the author?
Oh, could you repeat the name of the book you were reading?
Yes, absolutely. It's called Carry It On, The War on Poverty and the Civil Rights Movement in Alabama, 1964 through 1972. And the author is Susan Youngblood Ashmore.
Thank you.
Have any other questions for Sugar Shack? I kind of lumped our voting rights pieces together in this PowerPoint. So if you don't, if we can move on to Good Trouble. All right, so we've got Good Trouble pulled up now.
Okay. John Lewis is a personal hero of mine. I have admired him for many years, and I was devastated when he passed. He is just, to me, he's just the epitome of courage, strength, and justice. And so I really wanted to paint him. I've done a screen door series. I've done them for about 31 years now. Some of them are just fictional characters, fictional people that kind of tell the story of the South through my own eyes and memories. And very few actually represent people that I've known. And he is one of them. That door collection is called The Images of the American South, registered with the Library of Congress, and some of the pieces are in the collections around the country. Morris Museum of Art has one, President Bill Clinton has one. I mean, so that body of work it's a long running series. So I really wanted him to be a part of that. And I painted a little on his feet, on the shoes, some of the soil from the Edmund Pettus Bridge is painted on the bottom of his shoes. In hopes of people seeing this, and they will be inspired to continue to push to pass the Voting Rights Act, so everyone will be able to vote a little easier and not make it more difficult.
All right, do y'all have any questions on Good Trouble? We definitely did go down to Selma to get the Turk to ship up to her to put on there. Yes?
It's not about this in particular,
Okay.
but just an overall, how did she get into using art as a means of...
As activism, kind of?
As an activism thing. Were you already an artist and then turned to this, or were you a civil activist first and then used art?
Okay, so what made you decide to use art as activism? Were you an activist first and then turned to art, or an artist first that decided to use your platform for activism?
I have been an artist, full-time artist for over 30 years. My great-grandmother was an artist in Old Washington, Arkansas. Her work is in the Historic Arkansas Museum, along with some of mine. My father was an artist and an illustrator, so I've kind of been an artist my whole life, but I've been a professional artist for over 30 years. I did just a lot of commercial work, you know, just painting beautiful abstracts and pieces like that, and then the Screen Door series, which means a great deal to me. It's a lot more personal. I did not start doing civil rights work until 2015, when I realized the impact of the doors. Those doors literally changed my life. Changed my career path, changed the way I see the world. It changed everything. It changed my relationships with a lot of people that I tried to hang on to. I caught a lot of flack for doing this body of work from some people. Made them very uncomfortable. And I even got a phone call from a friend that I have known my whole life when I was in a hotel in Knoxville traveling with the work, that said that she didn't like my work at all, and that why didn't I paint pretty pictures anymore? And I said, well, I haven't talked to you in 20 years. How's your parents? You know? So I didn't start doing civil rights work until 2015. And it has truly been one of the most incredible journeys I have ever had, and I will stay on this path the rest of my life. I feel that strongly about it, and I do believe and have seen the impact that the arts can make in communities and in individuals.
Okay. Have any other questions? Yes.
What are the dimensions? Is the part on the right, is that just a close-up of?
Oh, it is,
the
yes.
full? Okay.
So I just wanted to really emphasize the soil from Selma on the shoes, so I just did a really zoomed in view and put it there. But what are the dimensions of your screen door?
Oh, the dimensions on the screen door is 83 inches tall. It's a little bit taller door than a regular screen door. A lot of regular ones are around 80 inches, by 36 inches wide, by 1.5 inches thick.
If you go to the museum, it's almost like he's just standing right in front of you, which is kind of cool. Do y'all have any other questions for Good Trouble?
I missed the year of this. Was John Lewis still alive? Was he able to see this?
No, so she just, you finished this right before you brought it to us, right? So
Yes, it was, paint was barely dry when I brought it down to you guys.
And she brought it to us in January of this year. So you've been gone for almost, I guess, 1.5 years by that point. Right. Any other questions about Good Trouble? All right, if we go to the next one, please. Okay, this is probably my favorite one from her End Hate series, which it's not in the museum right now, but we had it in 2018. And this piece is called Stained. And again, with this one, I have the photo of it fully, and then on the right is a close-up image of the tea bags on there. So if you would talk about Stained a little bit, please.
This is a piece I did it was a very powerful piece I did. And the narrative is, it represents the damage the extreme faction of the Tea Party has done to our country. And let me stop right there and say, I've talked to some friends in Arizona and some other states, and their Tea Parties are nowhere near as extreme as the ones in Arkansas, where I came from. So anyway, when the pages of the Bible are ripped out of context and used to harm others, it is created with over 606 individual pages of the Bible made into tea bags with real tea leaves inside. I started at the bottom with Leviticus, with an entire Bible being used in this piece as well as part of another one. Now, before I did this piece, I contacted a Baptist minister that I knew in Arkansas. I contacted a Catholic, a very, very staunch Catholic, somebody who's very, very, very religious. And then I contacted a Presbyterian minister friend of mine. I talked to all of them before I did this piece. I wasn't asking their permission, but I wanted to do this correctly. I will pull people around me and ask questions and kind of get people's opinions on some of these pieces that are fairly controversial before I do them. And what I heard from all three of them was the same thing. People rip pages out of the Bible every single day to harm others. You're ripping pages out of the Bible to show that that's not okay. So this has been an incredibly powerful piece. It has gotten a great deal of response. Believe it or not, I have not had any negative response on this piece, which surprised me a little bit. I am an ordained Presbyterian elder, and I have to say, I feel like my religion has been hijacked a lot. And so some of these pieces that I dabble with religion quite a bit on some of these pieces, just because I feel like that tainted faction has to be called out. And this is one of those pieces. So that's what this one represents. And it took quite a while to do that piece because of putting all those tea bags together.
I just wanted to add the tags that are down here, like on the tea bags, they have the "Don't Tread on Me" flag on them. And she was definitely more worried about showing this at the Rosa Parks Museum than the AR, the assault rifle we had made out of actual human bone, which we didn't get a negative response on either, but just more worried about this one. We were just like, oh, bring them both, it's fine. Do y'all have any questions on staying?
With these pieces, if you just walked up and saw some of them, you would get the wrong impression on some. But the narrative that goes along with them really ties it in together. Doing what I'm doing now, I'm actually really enjoying this. I don't enjoy doing artist talks in public. You will rarely find me behind a podium telling people, what these pieces mean. This is great, I love doing this, but I really want people that are going to see these things in person. I want them to stand next to them, read the narrative, see the body of work. I want this to be a very personal experience, and I want it to be engaging. So it's really worked out that way. It makes it a very, personal experience to the viewer that way.
Yes.
Just want to make sure I understand. The individual pieces are actual quotes that have been used to harm. Is that correct? These are not just random pieces.
Are the individual pages you use, I know you started at Leviticus, are they specific verses that were used or have been used for harm, or are they just like consecutive pages of the whole Bible?
Well, they're just consecutive pages because everybody, not just everybody, but I'm just saying the people that cherry pick the Bible, and we're going to talk about that in another piece here in a minute, they kind of just dig through and pick and choose a whole lot. So I just went consecutive with it because every person's going to read something differently and take it differently. No matter how literal, it is. Everyone seems to think, my father used to say, you've got to read between the lines. And I was like, oh my gosh, Dad, it's kind of scary. So I went consecutive with all the pieces, because of that.
Secondary question.
Yes.
How did you get the blue?
How did you get the blue color on there?
I used a little bit of a wash with acrylic paints. I use very, very expensive acrylic paints where the color will not fade. But I used a light wash with that, and I was absolutely terrified to try that after going through all the time it took to make those tea bags. because I wasn't quite sure how the paint was going to hold up on this, or I tried to do, a little sample on a couple of pieces, but until you really put it on there, you don't know what it's going to, do or how it's going to turn out. So I was very careful with it, and that's what I used, and it turned out well. I was really pleased with the results.
Any other questions on stage? All right, if we could go to the next one, please. Okay, this is the cherry picking one. This is scripture. So if you go into this one in a little bit more detail, this is probably our current favorite one at the museum. Maybe I'm gonna say that about all of them.
Yeah, this piece, I really like this piece as well. The narrative to that is cherry picking is a skilled game these days. In fact, the 1930 Art Deco wooden case this piece is created from is a historical early New York gambling cabinet that at one time had been outlawed due to its ability to easily manipulate and separate people from their money. There are a little over 640 cherries in the glass and wood enclosure, which represents pretty much half the pages of the Bible, since cherry pickers never read it much anyway. And this has been a very powerful piece as well. I've had a lot of response on that. It has actually been purchased by a collector after it tours. But that's basically what that means. People picking and choosing what they want out of the Bible to inflict things on others.
Okay. So I'm very glad we got to snag it and show it before it has to go home to its collector. So that's been great for us to have. Do y'all have any questions on cherry picking? On cherry picking scripture? I'm forgetting the names of your works.
How long will the exhibit be at the Rosa Parks?
Okay, so the exhibition Watchfires will be at the Rosa Parks Museum until June 18th. So the very last day to see it is at our annual Juneteenth festival, which is on a Saturday. It's free to come to the museum that day. Just like to throw that in there because it's normally not. But her art space is always free. So if you were just like in the city and needed something to do really quickly, like you can just run back there for free. But yeah, to June 18th. Any other questions on scripture? All right, if we could go to the next one, please. This one is the mark, and it is also in Watchfires. So if you could talk about this one a little bit, please.
A little bit more of this narrative as well. Confidence tricks exploit typical human characteristics such as greed, dishonesty, vanity, opportunism, lust, compassion, irresponsibility, desperation, and naiveness. The mark is heavy, uncomfortable imagery, and it's a powerful response to those political and religious leaders, as well as individuals who use such tricks to trivialize the Christian faith, to divide, marginalize, and damage people. They have succeeded in turning the true meaning of Christ into a circus or carnival game, where they target those that are easily misled. The goal is to achieve quick cash, status, and personal gain while joyously, intentionally, and violently beating the hell and the love out of Jesus. That's why the bell is in the middle of his chest. Unfortunately, they've mastered the ability to encourage others to do as well. The chalk handprints on the wooden mallet are a reminder of when dishonest carnival game operators called grifters found someone who they could entice to keep playing their rigged or gaffed game. They would then mark the player by patting their back with a hand that had chalk on it. Other game operators would then look at these chalk marks and entice the individual to also play their rigged game. This is the same thing that's going on with society today. Good people are being dangerously misled by these political and religious grifters, full of self-serving arrogance, picking and choosing biblical passages that are not read in full context to inflict or direct harm on others for no reason other than financial gain, or to make themselves seem and feel superior over others. The powerful words of Christ are now lost, forgotten, and buried under the stench of pride. I feel very strongly about this piece. I don't like turning on the TV or looking on my phone and reading about some of these pastors that are preaching straight from the Ku Klux Klan handbook. And it's happening more and more these days. As Christians, I believe that we have to stand up and say that that is not okay. As uncomfortable as it may be and as it's not as trendy, we have to say that that is not okay. And that is what this body of work represents. It's what this piece represents.
Do y'all have any questions about the mark? There's a heart that she has drawn on the bell. It's kind of hard to see just in this photo, but it's an anatomically correct heart there. Do y'all have any questions on the mark? And it's not operational, so if you go to the museum, you cannot ring the bell. We have the mallet zip tied down, so it's not a functional art piece at the moment.
Work, but it'll tear it up if too many people hit it.
All right, if y'all don't have any questions on the mark, we'll go to Tent Revival, which is also in Watchfires, and it's a pretty large piece. It sits opposite of Sugar Shack in the space. So if you could talk about Tent Revival.
Yeah, several of these pieces that we're talking about now have a lot to do with religion. And like I said in the past piece, I feel very strongly about this. Tent Revival is a piece, well, first of all, I was talking to an antique dealer out of Atlanta, Georgia one day. I used pictures from all over the country for some of my historical objects. And I noticed on his website the tiny old photograph of what I thought was just a revival tent with a Knights of the Ku Klux Klan sign in front of it. And so, and I'm reading from the narrative here, I had gone to plenty of church revivals in my youth, so it really caught my eye. After looking closer, though, it was then when I noticed the religious services Sunday evening, all welcome, sign sitting right next to it. The Klan and the local church were sharing the same tent. From what I see today, there are some good churches out there. There's a lot of good churches. But with many, not a whole lot has changed. White supremacy is alive and well in the church. It's ferociously claimed the white pages of the Bible as its own, hang on a second. It's ferociously claimed the white pages of the Bible as its own, while brutally moving the black letters around at will. The last time I checked, the robe Jesus wore didn't come with a hood. This revival tent is made out of an original Grand Wizard. His name was Roy Frank Hauser Jr. He's out of Pennsylvania. It is a Cyclops Klan robe, and the remaining materials are fabric, wood, string, and light. But he was something else. He was a government informant. He was a rabid white supremacist and member of the Klan. And then he became a minister and spewed his filth, basically, and his hatred that way. So I made that tent out of that Klan robe. And it was, I've never quite done anything like that before. My grandmother taught me to sew, but this one was a little more challenging. So I wanted to recreate a revival tent out of it and then, you know, write the narrative to go along with that as well.
And if you want to look at her other works I don't have featured on here because there are just so many and my parents had to suffer through me picking and choosing a lot over the weekend. She does a lot of work with Klan robes, Klan hoods. They are very easy to find, unfortunately, and get. So if you, I don't know, need inspiration for your next art piece, you could grab one too. Yes.
How does that feel working with that material? Do you feel a real visceral response in touching it and working with it and sewing it?
I will say, just before I tell her, I did. We had, in 2018, we had an actual Klan robe and hood that was that had human blood on it from the Red Summer of 1919, I believe, or was it 19? Okay. And I wouldn't touch it. I made her set it up. I would not do it. I would not deinstall it, install it. I would not go near it. But the question was, how does it feel to handle those kind of materials like Klan robes and Klan hoods? Like, what kind of feelings come up when you're touching them?
Well, the first robe that I acquired from a collector is the one that Madeline is talking about. I did not know, and this one came, I believe, out of North Carolina. We don't know where the Klan robes came before then. They move around between antique dealers. Arms dealers, to be honest with you, carry a lot of this memorabilia these days. So that robe, it was the first one I purchased. I was actually going to make a white supremacy flag, teabag flag out of that. That is before I decided to use the Bible pages, honestly. And when I received it, the guy had told me that a family had brought it in and they were wanting to hurry up and get rid of it. It did not have a hood with it. I said, okay, I'll take it. So when I got in the mail and opened it up, my partner at the time says, you're not opening that up in the house. You're going to take it down to the church and you're going to have the minister bless it before you open that evil thing. So I did, and when I pulled it out of the mailing packet, I noticed it had very, very old blood. It was covered in blood. And we all gasped. I wasn't expecting that. The dealer did not tell me about that. And on the back of the robe, you can even see bloody rope prints. They're very distinct. And so I called a friend of mine who does appraisals and things like that for museums. And she goes, oh yeah, that's blood. And then I called another friend of mine who knew Jerry Mitchell, and I believe he works with Southern Poverty Law Center around in there. And I can't remember what his organization is now, but he's a renowned expert with all this too. The guy's name was sewn into the back of a Klan robe. And he told me, and the Southern Poverty Law Center told me, that they run across these quite often, but there's no way to trace, there's no way to find out who these people were. The Klan kept such secret records. It's very, very difficult to track anything down. So instead of cutting that robe up, I just couldn't do it. I decided to leave it intact, and I did a still life, and I made a hood to go along with it. And I displayed it because I want people to see, when these people call themselves a Christian organization, I want them to see the blood on this robe, and I want them to see that that is not true. That is absolutely not true. But it was difficult to work with some of these pieces. I've gotten a little more acclimated to it now. One of the gun pieces I did after the Pulse nightclub massacre was made out of a human medical skeleton that I knew a dealer that had. That was gut-wrenching to me to work with that. It was very, very, it made me sick to my stomach for a day or two. But I made myself not wear gloves to handle, even though it was a medical skeleton, I made myself handle that because I feel like we have lost touch with each other. And once again, I had those bones blessed as well. And I just feel like we've got to reestablish connections no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Now, I don't think everyone needs to run out and, start handling medical skeletons and bloody Klan robes. But I believe that we have to force ourselves into uncomfortable situations sometimes to do the right thing and to feel that connection again and know the difference between right and wrong. Because in this digital age, with everything hitting us every 5 seconds, from the internet, from politicians, from this, that, and the other, we kind of just lose our way. And sometimes I feel the human brain just can't even keep up with that level of just onslaught of information all the time. We have to slow down and remember what's right and what's wrong. So yes, it has been uncomfortable to work with some of these materials. I've gotten better at it. I still feel it every time I touch one though. And sometimes, depending on what it is, I end up feeling extremely empowered toward the end.
Any other questions about tent revival? All right, we can move to the next one, please. And now this one is Benevolent Hue, which again is also in Watchfires. There are about 5 in here that aren't, so I'm trying to clarify that as I'm going along. So if you could talk about Benevolent Hue, please.
This is a piece, yes, this is a piece that I was reading. I read a lot. This is an article from Laura Ellis. She was with the Baptist News Global talking about, quote, nice white women participate in white supremacy too, unquote. I've experienced many of these women at church socials and prayer groups, and this article to me was deadly accurate. Take Emmett Till for an example, a 14-year-old black boy brutally murdered at the prime of his youth. Not only, hang on a second, make sure I'm reading this narrative correctly, because a white woman said that he was flirting with her. She later recanted her statement, but not before her words were forever etched in history. After they pulled his weighted down, tortured, disfigured body from the bottom of the Tallahatchie River. And a lot of this I'm going to quote from Ellis. One of the main foundations of racism is that the virtue of white women is threatened by the existence of black men. They are, quote, a damsel in distress whose sexual virtue and therefore value needs to be protected and kept pure at all cost. Men then commit unspeakable atrocities in the so-called name of honor and virtue as the women stand silent behind them. Ellis goes on to say, today the most frequent weapon white women use to maintain white supremacy is a niceness that downplays racial injustice. The feeling of being uncomfortable about the realities of white supremacy in our communities and the desire for nicer conversations are born out of a place of privilege. White women frequently respond to racism with sadness instead of outrage, or optimism instead of action. White women's niceness is particularly dangerous in churches where niceness is conflated with benevolence. So this piece represents the women of the church who quietly and politely tuck their white supremacy in their purse and stand in front of the Holy Cross cloaked in privilege and disguise. Their rigid hands and arms remain symbolically locked in prayer in a benevolent charade. The definition of a hue is a form or appearance. There are a combination of other paint pigments to emulate the real thing. So Ellis, I wanted to say, Ellis finishes with, quote, "There are nice white women in almost every church, and it is past time we take an honest look at how our congregations use the myth of white victimhood and the guise of women's niceness to maintain white supremacy." And so that piece has, inside that purse, is a white Bible, a solid white Bible, and a folded up Confederate flag from Appomattox. One of the curators there ended up giving me that. It had blown on the ground and he gave it to me. So that is folded up in that purse as well to represent basically the white supremacy.
Any questions on benevolent hue? All right, if we could go to the next one. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Yes.
Has there been much negative reaction to that one in terms of the feedback or, you know, you would mention even in your own personal life, sometimes rubbing people you know the wrong way? Has that been one that has been received negatively, or has it been received like many of the other pieces?
Has there been much negative reaction to benevolent hue? I think, are we the first place that has shown it?
You're the first museum that has shown it. I have a very large following on social media, and I have posted it on social media on all of them. Most of the people that follow me on social media, a great deal are across the country, but a lot of them are from South Arkansas. And so far, I have not received a negative comment on that, surprisingly so as well. I had a lot of people agree with me on that. Actually, some of the people that agreed with me, I was not expecting that.
As far as I know, we haven't had anyone dislike it or say that they did at the museum. They haven't come up to us and complained, or else no one's told me.
Oh, nice white women at the church. My grandmother was one of the nicest people I know, and her, you know, she was sitting in a pew every Sunday morning. But we do have a problem with white supremacy, and it seems like it's always pushed off on the men. But the women do stay silent a great deal, and I think should speak up more.
Did I get all parts of your question?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Any other questions on benevolent hue? Miss anybody? All right, if we could go to the next one, which is veneration. And if you can tell me.
Okay, I'm going to read from this one as well. Racism, xenophobia, homophobia, religious freedom bills, allowing the refusal of life-saving medical care or a sandwich in a restaurant, standing vehemently on a platform for the unborn, yet conveniently turning a blind eye to the sexual abuse of children in cages and the forced sterilization of minorities, innocent school children being slaughtered in their hallways, Black lives being callously extinguished at an alarming rate, neo-Nazi white supremacists marching under a Christian cross. The politicization, whatever, of humanity, sorry, I'm drawing, my tongue's tangled on that one. The blind, intoxicating quest for power, and the unquenchable thirst for tax-free money flowing towards yachts, mansions, and secret sexual rendezvous. A shameful stench of hypocrisy. False prophets, you sure never hear them talk about Jesus anymore. They've conveniently replaced him with something more sinister to worship. A rigid iron Jim Crow standing on the same 30 pieces of silver, representing the timeless reward for betrayal. This piece, to me, I was really, when I created this, there was a whole lot going on with Jerry Falwell and all that, you know, all those rumors of sexual innuendos and all the money and all that. And he's not the only one. There's several really popular people you hear about like that. But I think that the money in a lot of churches and a lot of political organizations to begin with, I think that it has tainted people, and of course they've lost the meaning of Christ through all this. Jim Crow is alive and well, and a lot of times it is sitting in a pew next to you every Sunday morning. So that's what that piece represents. And those pieces of silver, there are $200 worth of silver standing underneath that crow. I had a coin dealer get those pieces for me. We went back to, I can't remember the exact date, but it's the date where they used a lot of silver in the coins back then.
I will say with this one, every other day, just about, someone comes up and is like, hey, just so you know, back there, Jesus has fallen over if you want to pick him up. Like, I know, that's the point. So we have him like puttied down on there so they can't try to move him. But really, every other day, I'm like, read the label, guys. That's why we wrote them. Do y'all have any questions on veneration?
Though, Madeline, I think that's sweet.
About that, but yeah. Even our custodial staff, they've tried to fix Jesus. So, yes.
How much time does she spend working on the narration in addition to the piece itself?
How much time do you spend working on the narration for each piece?
You know, actually about the same amount of time. I love to write. I have found that not only is it therapeutic for me, but a lot of people really grasp the body of work a lot more when I tie the two together. I think it's very important to tell people what you're thinking when you create these pieces. Especially the ones that appear to be so controversial. So I spent quite a bit of time on my writing with it, and I have gotten a very good reception from the narratives as well.
Any other questions about veneration? I didn't know it was $200 worth of silver.
You better stay away from those coins.
All right, if we could go to the next slide, please. This is Blessed Assurance. It is not in the museum right now. It's part of the intake collection, so it's not in Watchfires. So if you could go over Blessed Assurance, please.
Blessed Assurance, I don't have my paper with me right now, so I won't be reading the narratives on that, but let me pull it up, actually. Let me pull my phone, because I want to stick true to this with it. Hang on just a second here. I think my printer missed a piece of paper there. Okay, the narrative on this, the Charleston Massacre literally devastated me. It was gut-wrenching to read about that and see that. I could not believe the level of evil a young person was capable of due to the venomous indoctrination of hate. This piece was created after reading about the numerous black churches that were horrifically being burned down through the South after the Charleston Massacre. The stained glass windows from 1896 and the brass fire extinguishers from the 1920s. Both come from old churches in South Arkansas. The wooden background is made from an old church pew from off Roosevelt Road in South Little Rock and burned along with old wallpaper attached to it. And so that is what that piece represents. Dylan Roof, there was a guy that spoke. Christian Piccolini is an ex-white supremacist that spoke at the Virginia Holocaust Museum when my exhibition was there. And he and I have stayed in touch since then. We want to collaborate on a project, I hope, in the near future. But he used to be a white supremacist, and he was in a white supremacist band. And when Dylan Roof was arrested, they found the lyrics to some of Christian's music, who has changed his ways and travels the country. He's been on all major news, cycles and everything, talking about white supremacy, and he is reformed, and he's an amazing guy. But they found the lyrics to some of his white supremacy songs when he was younger in Dylan Roof's possession. So this piece was very powerful to do. The glass is cracked at the bottom, which I think is representational of violence. And the piece is very old and very fragile. So that is what that piece, that's the definition of that.
Do y'all have any questions on Blessed Assurance? Never seen this one in person, actually. Yes?
two connections that I was just thinking about. One that looks like our window.
Okay. Pastor says it looks like your window, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the terrible thing is Dylan Roof was a Lutheran kid.
He's what?
He was a Lutheran kid, ELCA church.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So also Dylan Roof was Lutheran, ELCA, and that's where you're speaking right now.
Kidding me, I did not know that.
No,
Wow.
no, it's just, it hits, that's all.
So I'm glad I didn't cut this one. We made it, I didn't know that.
Know that.
All right, if we could go to the next one, please. All right, this is the last one we have on here, and this is Hand of God, which is also a new work. So I haven't seen it, and it's not in the show right now.
This is a really cool piece. I actually did this piece before COVID. I had moved to Richmond, Virginia, and lived for a year and helped the museum tour my work. The museum in Longwood was about an hour from Richmond. And so it was real convenient to be there to where I could jump on the train and be in New York or DC and then drive down, if I needed to, drive down to Longwood. So one morning I was leaving early and I stopped at a red light off Broad Street, and this gentleman was panhandling on the corner, and he had this hat on with a cross on it. And when I rolled my window down, because the light, the sun was coming up and the light was behind him, and it was just the angle that he was standing on that cold morning, and it looked like rays were coming from his head. He literally looked like an angel. So I rolled my window down and I asked him, I said, "Can I take your photograph?" And he says, "Yes, you can." And so I did. And of course, all the change that I had, I didn't have a whole lot with me, but I gave him everything I had. And before I drove off, you know, he blessed me. And that was just, the photograph was absolutely incredible. So I wanted to paint him, and I did. And so I'm going to read a little bit about that too. The old silk flag that I used in the background, I found in an antique shop many years ago. It was very worn and fragile. It was basically falling apart. But I was able to attach it to the canvas back there. And then I had to Google silk/fabric preservation so I could try to stabilize it. I felt the flag and its condition and this amazing homeless man were the perfect combination, because you can't see that this piece if you can't see that this piece represents freedom and saving both, you're missing the whole point of the project. We're all the same, no matter our economic status, race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion. We are all worthy of love, compassion, and respect, and we all deserve to feel a sense of pride. This man showed me a great deal of love and respect that day and didn't even know who I was, and that he had nothing. I hope I've done the same by capturing his amazing spirit in return. Found out later through some friends in Richmond, while I was isolating during COVID back in Arkansas, that his name was William, and that he slept in the park there. And then I was going to try to sell the piece and put a little money through her to him. After COVID got so bad and it was so hard to reach out to people there for a while, I ended up donating this piece to the St. Joseph's place, the St. Joseph Center of Arkansas, where I was staying. And they auctioned it off and used it to support the community through their urban farms and foods and things like that. So I ended up donating that piece. But I will never forget that guy. And he's like an angel. I believe angels walk amongst us, and I think they come in all different forms. And I believe that in my heart that he was one.
So I wanted it to kind of end on a last work that was more uplifting, I guess, than some of her others, because she has such heavy works of art, and this one's just a little, hopeful. Do y'all have any questions about Hand of God? Right? If you want to. Oh, yes.
Oh, I just have a general. Are there any of these works that you would prefer to keep in your private collection and not be able to part with?
I know there's a photograph that she wants to keep in her private collection. Are there any of the works that you want to keep in your private collection and not sell or donate?
I've thought long and hard about that. My art teacher in school told us to never do that, to never get that attached to your work. When you do work on this level, you can't help but get attached to it. It's part of who you are and what you believe. I believe it's part of your soul. And so I feel a connection to all of these pieces, to be honest with you. They're all very special to me. I can't think of any that I would truly want to hang on to, because I believe that the reason I created them was to put a message out there to others, for people to see these and to stop and think about the world is changing so fast. And it's going to change regardless. Progress is going to come. To me, I've always said progress is like the Grinch that stole Christmas. People try to stop it. And, you know, like the Grinch stole all the Christmas ornaments and all that, and Christmas came anyway. The progress is going to come anyway. But as we struggle through and stumble through these movements of change, you know, a lot of times bad things happen along the way, and we have a lot of opportunists that take advantage of that. People get scared and angry. I want people to look at some of these pieces and read the narratives and just slow down and remember, you know, bottom line, that we've all got to stick together and be good to one another. I had an evangelical minister when I first did the Murder of Crows exhibition, the one that traveled to the Rosa Parks Museum the first time. And I had rented a building in Little Rock, Arkansas to show it. And he came up to me and he goes, "I'm an evangelical minister from Northwest Arkansas." And he goes, "I just want to tell you something." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "I've been doing it wrong." He said, "Some of my congregation is starting to act peculiar, and they're doing things that I don't quite totally agree on. They're getting caught up with all this stuff on the news." He said, "I just don't think it's right." And he goes, "And after seeing your body of work today, I'm going to go back and talk to him about it." So that exhibition, when I first showed it for the first time, was only supposed to be a weekend exhibition, that the place that I'd rented to show it, because I had quite a bit of work. And it ended up running for 6 weeks, and people flew in from all across the country to see it. I was stunned at the response. So I want these pieces to be seen. I hope that many of them, some of them have been collected. I hope several more will go into collections, to where, you know, once I'm gone, I hope that they're still around and people can talk about them and go, "Hey, you know what, that's really, this is not right," or "This gives me hope," or "I want to think about things." And so that's how I feel about these pieces. I probably won't hang on to any of them, to be honest with you, for that very reason.
Do you have a question? Somebody else have a question? Could have sworn I saw another hand earlier. Any other questions about either Hand of God or just her body of work or everything? Comments, concerns? I guess maybe I shouldn't open it like that. Yes.
I have a question, and it's not about the artwork so much as that you have a magnifying glass on a desk as part of your little antique collection back there behind, over your left shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Do you have some kind of like leftovers or antiques behind you, or are you just like an antique collector?
I like unique things. This ladder behind me came from an old shoe salesman. He had several shoe stores from the 30s to the 50s down in South Arkansas. And he ended up, when he got older, selling some of these things, and we became friends. And so I've taken that ladder everywhere I've gone. It barely fits in my van, and it rides up on the dashboard all the way to the back if I move anywhere. But I love it. I love things like that. And I tell you, I'm going to swing this around, if that's all right, and show you a piece that's in my living room now. I had to move some things out of my storage unit here. For an example, I have an old church steeple. I don't know if you can see that. Is the light too weird, Madeline?
It's to it. Oh, is that no vacancy?
No vacancy piece. I don't know if you can see that or not. Is it going to be too dark with?
It's wait, there it is.
Oh, hang on. Oh, here we go. There we go. That is an old church steeple from the Arkansas Delta. And I read an article, 2 articles actually, of a young man who received a message from his church in Arkansas. They found out he was gay. They sent him a letter that told him not to ever come back again. And then, I think it was Baxter County, I believe. I'll have to look back and see. But also during that same time, there was a man whose partner had passed away, and he couldn't bury his partner in the church cemetery. It was a big deal. They really got upset over it. So he was moving his partner's headstone, and a guy walked up to him in a Walmart parking lot in that area with a Bowie knife and called him a faggot and threatened violence on him. And I did this piece, I made this wooden sign, church sign, and the no lights up and flickers, kind of like one of those old hotel signs, I guess. But it's acceptance and no vacancy. But that old church steeple, I'm really glad I was able to get that. So I do run across some interesting pieces from time to time. And I love looking at these pieces. People seem to relate very well to old collectibles as well. And it's also been an opportunity to talk about things instead of someone saying fake news, because a lot of these pieces that I use, they have a distinct history behind them. And they're authentic, they're real. I try to keep authenticity with the pieces of work as much as possible. And I do a lot of research on the history and things like that. So yeah, I kind of run across things from time to time, but I usually end up using most of them in my work.
Any other questions for her? Yes.
How long does it take to do any given piece, and how much time do you spend on it?
How long does it take to do any of the
time that it takes her to do?
Sorry?
The time that it takes her to work on
the time. How long does it take you to work maybe on each piece? Is there an estimate, or some just like super fast?
The paintings normally take longer than the sculptures do. I'm a kind of an impatient artist. I really like to throw myself into my work. I like using a lot of tools. I love using my hands. To sit still and paint's a little difficult for me. Sometimes I have a hard time sitting and watching the movie, all the way through. But the doors, for an example, I did those doors in 3 days, but I did not sleep for 3 days. One of the final photographs when I was doing those, at the time my partner took a photograph and it was me sleeping on the studio floor with the cat piled up on top of me. I finally just collapsed. Sometimes I really get into my work on that level, and I have slept on the studio floor numerous times. Sometimes it takes a few weeks. Sometimes I'll just run straight through and just not stop until I just collapse. So it really just depends on the project, but I pretty much throw myself into almost every one of them on that level.
Any last questions for? If you don't mind hitting the next slide by chance, because I have her website listed, as well as like the Rosa Parks Museum, but I have her website and everything on the last slide, as well as her Instagram account if you have social media, and then the museums, and then I don't know mine, because I guess I like followers. But yeah, thank y'all, I guess, for coming. And thank you, V.L, for agreeing to do this in a different time zone.
Yeah, sorry about that earlier. I got my time zones mixed up, I think. But I've really enjoyed this. I really appreciate this opportunity, and it has really been comfortable, and it's been enjoyable, and I really want to thank you guys for this.
Thank you.
And I brought a couple of copies of her catalog because I do work at a nonprofit, so any chance I can get to sell something, I'm going to. But I made the catalog for her exhibition. If y'all are interested in it and want to learn more, all of the narratives are in here, except for a few, and then there's a bio page. Or if you just want more information before you leave about any of the works, I can pull it from here.
So the price of the catalog?
Say too that if anyone wants a copy of the Murder of Crows book, which was the first book, I've had 3 catalogs with my work. The second one, the Longwood Center for the Visual Arts Museum did, and I don't have hardly any of those left. But I do have several from the first one as well. If you will let Madeline know, I will make sure to send some of these books down to the church, and you guys are more than welcome to have some.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for coming. Sure. All right, I'll talk to you later, I guess. Probably.
Thank you, guys.